All right, last presentation for week one, and it's going to be bridge aesthetics. And we've touched on a couple of these things as we're looking at forming for abutments and whatnot, but Melissa Schultz is with us. She's the architectural specialist, whatever your fancy title is, and in the bridge office. And you can explain up some of your experience and how long you've been with MnDOT, probably 15 years now?
16, yeah.
Oh, so time flies, we're having fun. But, so we'll do this, and then we'll take roughly a 10-minute break, and then we'll do some review questions, meant to be a review before the end of the meeting. So with that,
nice. So yeah, I do all of the bridge aesthetics, some noise walls, retaining walls for MnDOT. So if you have a question, you get me, like it or not, for 20 years or so. Got it. Thank you, because I did not know the answer to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we do aesthetics. That's a big topic, right? Like why do we spend taxpayer funds on this type of thing? And kind of how that is regulated. Because I think when we know why, that helps us really facilitate actually doing the job. Talk about costs a little bit, textures, surface finishes, railings, lighting, public art, all of the different things that go into aesthetics. So aesthetics is really the perception of what is beautiful, and then bridge aesthetics, you have to marry that with engineering. It has to be safe. Above all, anything that I do in my job has to be safe first. The beauty of it comes second. And it's not actually as subjective as you would think. A lot of people, when they do studies on this, we all actually tend to find the same things as beautiful when it comes to this stuff, but we have to marry that architecture and engineering. I do not intentionally make things harder. I know aesthetics does make things harder to construct and inspect. That is not the intent. So if at any point we're out there and you're inspecting something and you're like, dang it, Melissa, you do this every single time and it makes our jobs harder, call me. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's see if we can come up with a better, easier way to do something. It's probably just because I don't know that there's a better way to do something. So please, there's an open line of communication. Let's have a conversation. Just making it smooth concrete is probably not going to be the answer, but we can get creative. So why do we do aesthetics? Aesthetics really matter, right? So somebody comes in for a job interview, who are you going to hire, right? You're going to go a little bit off of looks here, and you are definitely going to hire James Bond, right? And that is because looks really do matter. So why? So there's a few things. So obviously there is enhancing your environment, but there is a context-sensitive solution. So MnDOT does not put a hot pink bridge in a state park. It doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use natural stones that are found in the region, natural colors. When you look at bridges in a lot of our communities, take North St. Paul for example. If you look at the North St. Paul downtown, it's a lot of concrete textures with brick. Well, what did we do when we built the highway? We did a lot of brick and a lot of those same concrete textures. We really try and match the context of the area so that everything can fit in and really create a cohesive community design. Wayfinding is really important. So most of us do not give directions north, south, east, west, right? If I'm going to tell you how to get to my house, I'm going to say look for the field with the big creepy tree. It goes turkey, pheasant, duck, take a right. We're not using north, south. We do the same things with our highway systems. So we design a lot in corridors. So 36 looks the same, 94 looks the same for segments of it. So when you get on the highway, you can look around and go, man, I know where I am now. I recognize this visually. I might be going the wrong direction and I need to turn around, but these visual cues tell me where I am. There's also bringing a sense of identity. If I had $1 for every time I heard gateway feature or signature structure said by an individual community, I would have retired by now. Every single community wants to have their own established identity. They want to advertise their neighborhood, their community. Visually implied strength and safety, that's super, super important after the bridge collapse. We actually don't need our bridge piers to be 4 foot by 6 foot columns. They can be 2 foot round columns. But then what happens is you have this heavy looking superstructure sitting on these tiny little toothpicks and the public gets very nervous. Yes, it is structurally sound, but visually, our brain doesn't see it that way. So we beef certain things up to make it appear safer, and that makes the public feel more comfortable. Historic stuff, there are historic structures that has federal oversight, so I usually don't get involved, but there are specific guidelines for aesthetics when historic involvement is there. There are economic impacts as well. So take this picture for example. These look like two images, right, of like two different neighborhoods that look split, but this is actually what it looks like from the air. We don't want to do this. In Minnesota, everybody, all the taxpayers, kind of get equal funding for aesthetics. We don't want to create higher funding levels in one area than another. It doesn't matter if you're Starbucks, Minnesota, if you're Minneapolis, Minnesota, you are going to have the same type of funding and aesthetic level put into the process. The structure dictates what you get. Here is a great example. So these two communities are almost identical. They have very similar crime rates, very similar wages, all the different things are similar between these two communities. Amenities, all the things. If you're a traveler and you're driving through on your road trip, where are you going to stop? Where do you feel comfortable, especially if you're a woman? Where are you going to feel comfortable getting out of your car? Where are you going to feel like you can come spend your tax dollars? You're going to go there, right? This is Loveland, Colorado, and this is over in Wisconsin. This is Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So, like I said, they're both very, very similar areas, but the aesthetics are going to dictate where travelers spend their money. That can really impact the neighborhoods. That can impact the business owners that are right off of these exits. So aesthetics are important. Now that is pretty above and beyond. MnDOT would pay for that, but they have a lot of pot money, so. It's true, it is true. So we kind of have the 4 C's of bridge aesthetics. Context, like I talked about, that state park idea. Comprehensiveness, this is a big one. We don't actually try and spend every penny. So each bridge has an allotted dollars. We don't try and spend every penny. I have a good example of this. We had a bridge where there was some city councilmen involved and all this stuff, and we got really focused on the dollars. And there was still some money left over, and he was like, well, what if we take these steel circles and we mount them to the side of the bridge? And I was like, polka dots? Like, we're gonna put polka dots on here? And he was so focused on spending the money that he was not focused on the fact that the bridge design was already really great. We didn't have to spend that money and try to find ways to add features. We already had it. So we really want to make sure that that design is kind of looked at comprehensively. Cost, we all have a budget. That's what we do. And again, constructability. Don't try to make it harder. Although I joke with the engineers, if you make me angry, I will make it round. So here's MnDOT's cost structure. So we have level A, B, and C bridges. Your level A's are your Stillwater River crossings, your Blackneck Bridge, your really, really major river crossing, Hastings. The average bridge that you're going to come across is going to be a B or a C. A B is everything in the metro. Usually a B has pedestrians above it or below it. It usually has kind of a closer interaction. Or it's in the metro where you just have a high volume of viewers. A level C is probably only viewed from either above or below. It does have some aesthetics, although most level C bridges don't get any just because there's nowhere to really put it. They're usually small structures, tiny abutments, that sort of thing. So how it works for most bridges is 7% of the total cost of the bridge not to exceed $300,000. For the most part, the aesthetics that you see around the metro fit within that budget. So we're usually not spending more than $300,000 on a bridge. If something does have a super high level, like Loveland, Colorado, right? That means that outside partners kicked in funds. And when we get into the public art realm, that could actually be individual citizens and separate from any government entity. Some things we do, natural stone, we don't do that often. It's really cost prohibitive. But in this case, we have done it in some places. This is up near St. Cloud, right near Granite City Quarry. You put granite on it, right? That just kind of makes sense. And I believe we probably got really cheap stone because they wanted to use it as an advertisement right outside their business. Another thing that we do often is just batten strips attached to the forms. This is just going to break up big walls, kind of makes it look like stacked stone, fairly easy to construct. Usually doesn't have a pay item, it's probably just incidental to the concrete work. Insets is another thing, just adding some insets to the form, trying to break it up, create some shadows. Texture skins. These are just a roughened texture that will break up the tough stuff. Just break it up so you can see the difference between the smooth and the texture. Just really gives some dimension to 20, 30-foot walls. We also know that, now this doesn't always work, but we do know that adding texture to surfaces reduces graffiti, especially if it's a very rough texture. Now, it doesn't always stop graffiti, but it does reduce that because it makes their artwork harder to read, and it also takes a lot more paint, and graffiti artists have a budget too. and we need to remove that graffiti very quickly. But, so if you ever see cases where we put like really heavy textures in some weird areas, that might actually be why. That might have been part of the conversation is graffiti reduction. Especially when it comes to our new noise walls. Our new noise walls are noise absorptive. So if you actually get very close to them, they're very rough and have little holes all over in them. And that's so the sound can go in and bounce around in that hole and come out. It doesn't reflect that sound back. Ribbed textures, these were really popular in the 70s and 80s. Somebody not too long ago told me that this is warehouse chic. And I think it's pretty well fallen out of favor in most of the metro. I don't have any communities asking for this type of texture anymore, but it's very common from bridges in the 70s and 80s. Coursed stone, so Minnesota has a ton of limestone quarries. So in mid, southwest Minnesota, in that whole area, you're gonna see us use a lot of coarse stones, ashlar stones, just because that is the stones that are normally in the region. We are just replicating that with form liner. Northern Minnesota, you're going to see a lot of field stone. This is all up Highway 61, so this is on the North Shore. This is an example of exactly what you want to do. So you can see that the local stone that was brought in for the riprap matches that form liner. So that's what we talk about when we see cohesiveness, comprehensive design, context-sensitive design. This is a project where everything is done right. We do occasionally do custom form work, usually not, because that will bump it up outside of the aesthetic allowance. It also takes a lot of design time, and I'm only one person, so there's only so much that I can do. This will occasionally happen when you have consultant firms, but not too much because it is more expensive. Form liner materials. So this is where you really want to watch for out of the field. This is EPS foam. We do not allow that on our projects. We will look at it on a case-by-case basis. Usually on a smaller project where there's not a lot of forms, probably not going to be replicated, and it can't be near water. So if you look at that, obviously, when you start tearing that off, those little beads are going to be floating down your waterway. That's a big no-no. If it's a smaller project where we can contain it, we will allow it. It used to not be allowed at all because form release agents weren't great, and so those little beads would get stuck in it, and it would just be a huge pain for everybody. But now technology has gotten so much better that we will look at that on a case-by-case basis. Always ask, because the cost between that and what is in MnDOT specs, and most other places do use MnDOT specs. A lot of cities, even North Dakota uses our specs in a lot of cases. So make sure you're getting a discount because that cost difference is very big. So that is very commonly snuck in as something that they want to use because they know that they're pulling the wool over your eyes and getting something for cheap. ABS plastic, this is something that we do not allow. We would potentially allow it in something like this where they could backfill these, but it becomes very brittle. And you can see it will break. And so we found over time most of this does not stand up to concrete core pressures. Sometimes it will be allowed, but usually not. They'd have to make a case for it. HDPE plastic. This is a newer one. We haven't used it very much. This is a very, very heavy plastic. I always say this is like a cast iron frying pan. You want to keep some of this by your bed, and if there's an intruder, whack them with it, because this stuff is heavy duty. Usually this is going to be very unique forms. So this is going to be cut with a router of some sort, and you can do unique shapes. As far as I know, we've only used it on 2 projects so far where there were kind of curves and very unique shapes. But if this is ever requested, let us know, because we do want to see how it works over time. And then this is elastomeric urethane. So this is what is in our specs as the standard product. This is created, most of it is created in Minnesota or just over in Hudson, Wisconsin. That is a reusable product. Please make sure that they are throwing them away at the end of their shelf life. So they can use these over and over and over again, up to 40 to 60 reuses. And since a lot of our corridors are in the same textures, they will try and use them past their life. So just make sure that the really bad ones are getting thrown away. And then thin brick. This is a super popular product because Minnesota made a lot of brick. You go into any tiny town in Minnesota, it's brick, right? We made a lot of it here. This product is finally something that is affordable for us to use and is lasting very, very well. And then graffiti removal is just pressure washing. There's no anti-graffiti coatings or repainting or anything like that. So it is very, very nice. How this is actually done is these little pieces are stapled to the forms. The brick is set in the little piece, and then the concrete is poured, the form is pulled off, and your brick is stuck. So the actual concrete makes up your mortar joints. This is all of Highway 36, Valley Creek Road and 494. So it has, so when you look at the cost difference between these two, you have your brick, which does have a higher cost of construction. But then when you look at the form liner below it, you have the construction cost, you have the painting cost, now you have the anti-graffiti coating cost. So cost-wise, they actually flush out as pretty even, but there is a little bit of messing around with those bricks. We are getting better with it over time as we work with it and kind of figured it out. So concrete textures, kind of your do's and your don'ts. Extended 2 feet below grade. We know ground shifts and stuff, it would look kind of weird if all of a sudden there was this little patch poking out that didn't have texture on it. Fill bucket holes greater than 1/2 inch in diameter and blend those surface treatments. Try and make it look like real stone. Make sure they're making it look like real stone. We don't want sandblasting for surface prep. That is because when you look at some of these textures, they are bumpy, right? We don't want the texture blasted off. We're adding it with a purpose, right? So we don't do sandblasting. And then any changes, please contact the bridge office. It might not seem like much of a change. Most of the time we're approving them, but sometimes there's bigger issues. So if they say, hey, we want to use this texture here, and it has 3 inches of depth, and we only specify 2, we now might not have enough cover over our reinforcement, so we want to deny that. So that's the type of stuff we're often looking for when changes are requested. Then we have surface finishes. MnDOT has 2 different types of finishes. We have architectural surface finish and special surface finish. The easiest way to remember this is architectural surface finish goes on architecture. So that's what's going to go on your form liner treatments. That is more like your paint, the paint that you find in your home. It's very thin, watery. And that we have single, 2, 3, and multicolor. Here's an example of single color. So we have giant walls, trying to break them up, make them aesthetic, but we can't go through and, you know, multi-color miles and miles of these giant walls. So we just did single color, and then the shadows do the work for you. Here's an example of 3 color. So they put down a base color, they put like a highlight color in these low spots, and then you have your mortar joint color. And then this is an example of multicolor. Now the way the spec is written is each stone must use 5 colors minimum. And you can look at it and you can see, when you look at these stones, you have a light color, you have a dark color, you have a rust color, sound, right? When you look at real rock, it's not one color. Don't do this. This is where they painted one rock, one color, one rock, another color. The really sad part of this is, this was a pedestrian tunnel, and this was one side of it that MnDOT did and did it with form liner. It was painted. That is the other side of it that was done with real stone. So our form liner application should have looked something closer to this test panel from a different project. You would have had a darker mortar joint, but you can see very clearly the difference between these stones and those. So make sure they're using good painting techniques. They're all getting much better at it. This isn't new anymore. We've been doing it since, well, it pretty much started in the late 90s. Anti-graffiti coating. This is a clear permanent sealer. We're only putting it on multicolored surfaces. Our maintenance forces have no idea where this is. So we only put it on multicolor. And that's because they can't just go out and paint over it. Graffiti is a public safety hazard, which I did not know until I started working here. So yeah, some of it's just teens being teens. But some of it in certain areas of the city, it might say, buy a gun here, buy drugs here, buy a girl here, whatever. So we want that removed as fast as possible. So single color, they just paint over it with single color, because usually they're also doing traffic control. So they'll set up traffic control, go out, quick paint something, come back. Only multicolor. And then also our state entrance signs, those are completely covered in graffiti coating. I don't even know why I know that. Special surface finish. Now this is a thicker coating. I don't think I have a sample of it actually. This is what is going to go on your smooth surfaces. This is no longer just paint. This actually, now the new technologies protect the life of the structure. So they have chloride protection in them. So a lot of people are like, why do we paint our bridges if they're going to look poor over time? Well, in this case, it is actually extending the life of the structure now. So it's not just paint. What we tint it doesn't matter. Although nobody has taken me up on hot pink yet. Someday some city will give me money to do one, but so far no luck. So when we look at special surface finish, it's a thicker coating and it has a texture to it. And we can even specify really heavy textures in it, but usually we use closer to a sand texture depending on where. So this reduces concrete finishing, provides uniform service, and then you'll notice in our specs we have special surface finish and special surface finish 2. So the 2 is the new technology. That is pretty much what most people are using. We do still allow the older bucket 3-part mix system. That is still allowed, but most people aren't using it because the Texcoat product is so great. But we cannot remove that as a product that we allow because there is only one approved and we cannot single source. So if you want to make millions of dollars, you can create a competing product, special surface finish 2, and then we would have more products and you would be a millionaire. So SSF2, you can use it as a lost my word. A curing. So you don't need curing compound if you use this. You can actually put the color on right away, which in Minnesota, that's huge, right? We're always chasing winter. So that is one of the benefits of it is you can just apply it right away. You don't have to wait like you would with a traditional paint system. It does have the factory mix. Its long-term performance is better than paint from what we've seen so far. We've had it out there, I don't know, Mark would probably know. Hanson Boulevard. So whenever Hanson and 10 was built, we are currently not using it for dark colors. So if we specify dark colors, specifically up on the iron range, we tend to use a color that looks like iron ore. So in that case, we will not use it. For whatever reason, the pigments that are used to create dark colors do not hold up. So we had a bridge where hey, we're gonna put the iron ore color on it, it's great. And it rained and whoop, it washed it off. So that was not so great. So we cannot use the SSF2 on dark colors. In the specs, you are going to always see the bridge level in here, the aesthetic level of those bridges, that A, B, C. And you're gonna ask yourself, why in the world does that matter to me? And the reason is because that is how we approve products. So when we're looking at our approved products list, like I said, we only have text code. We'd love more, but right now we only have the text code for the SSF2. If a new product comes along, they can only be used on level C bridges. We'll analyze them, make sure they're working great, and then once they've been out there for 2 years and we're not seeing problems, then they can go to level B, and then they can go to level A. We will not let somebody put a new product on something like the St. Croix River crossing, right? Because what happens if that fails? You're over a waterway with a failing system, major public scrutiny, all of the things. So we make them start small. So that is why our specs specify an aesthetic level in them. It's because that's how we're approving new products. So we use smooth on barriers and then kind of a textured finish on everything else. The reason for that is salt. We don't want those little texture any texture is going to let salt sit there and just wreck everything. So we want smooth on our barriers that are taking the biggest hit to salt. Textured finish on everything else because that just helps kind of hide any of the imperfections. Another thing to do is mix to keep the components in suspension. So since it does have a texture, Mark was out on a project once where they had a 55-gallon drum and a drill bit mixer. Well, that wasn't really getting what was on the bottom. And now when you start painting, you're going to get kind of this weird patchwork of stuff. And we do spray applied, and they can back roll it, but we do not allow roll applied. We tried it, and even though some of the manufacturers say you can do it, we just did not find the performance that we wanted for. Also, no thinning the product, and no rolling it on. So you're also going to see that SSF, there's batches that are taken, sampling, and then there's a monetary deduction based on delta E's. Now, what are delta E's? So if you have a color, they have a special fancy little gun that they can shine at it, and it'll tell you if the color is correct. And then there's monetary deductions if it's off. Now, why are we fining contractors when a color is not perfect? It actually has nothing to do with the appearance of the color. It is just the easiest way to figure out if something has happened along the way to the product. So we were having problems where products were being thinned, products were not performing properly, they were peeling off, colors were changing, all sorts of stuff. And this is the fastest method that we have figured out how to make sure that the product is correct and that nothing has happened to the product over time. So it really isn't about color, it's about making sure that we're getting the chloride protection and the surface that we're looking for. MnDOT does have a standard color palette now that we have been using for, I'd say, at least 8 years. When I first started, I started looking at all the colors and I was like, why do we have like 18 different dark browns? Can we just pick one? And then that hopefully will help maintenance forces going forward. Now, a community can choose to use a different color. It just makes the risk greater that graffiti is not going to be covered over with the right color. And we're getting better and better at that every year since we've slimmed down our palette. One thing you're going to notice in the field is federal standard colors, AMS colors, and RAL colors. Why all the different ones? So back in the 60s, the feds were like, hey, we're going to create a color palette. That's great. MnDOT came in and said, all right, perfect, we'll start using your color palette. Well, then several years ago, the feds said, yeah, we don't really want to maintain this anymore, so we're going to get rid of it. We're going to name it the AMS color palette. Same thing. If you have a federal palette or an AMS palette, they are the same thing. Color 3522 is the same in both books. It's just who owns those books. So you don't need to get a new book if you have an old federal one. AMS and federal are the same. Well, then comes railings and the powder coating industry. And powder coating has decided, yeah, we're not going to use the American standards, we're going to use the European. So they chose to go with RAL standards. So that is the only reason that you see RAL, and that's only done on products, specifically railing, that is using powder coating. So I've tried to simplify it as much as possible, and then people throw in wrenches in there, but we're getting better.
Why does the gray modifier with brown?
So I'm actually getting a manual. So later on this year, I'm getting a manual. And that is, I'm like, can we change this? It's not gray. That story actually has kind of a funny, that color is a funny story. So back in the day, somebody went to Sherwin-Williams and they found a color called Dawn Mist, and they were like, this matches aged concrete. And they were like, perfect. And every spec just said, get Dawn Mist, get Dawn Mist, get Dawn Mist. Well, then they came out and they said, MnDOT cannot specifically single source. You can't name a Sherwin-Williams color because what if you want to use non-Sherwin-Williams? So somebody said, okay, well, we're going to go to the lab and we're going to have them make that color. And so for years, 20 years, people had to call the lab to get the paint combination to create MnDOT gray, which was just Sherwin-Williams non-mist. And then I came along and I was like, okay, can we simplify this even further? And so now we actually found the closest federal color, and now our specs call it the closest federal color. So they're all federal color. And changing it to actually just be like, we just call them like gray, beige, and tan, instead of like having these crazy names. So that is coming up as a topic of conversation, because you're right, Katie.
Why not modify tan instead of modified gray?
Yeah,
It doesn't look gray.
It doesn't look gray, no. And even just having it MnDOT gray, well, when we do partners with a city, they're like, well, what is MnDOT gray? Well, okay. So yeah, that is all being simplified. So ornamental metal railings, this is probably one of the biggest problems that we have from inspections on an aesthetic level. Please, please, please make sure that you're inspecting them at delivery. So we need to be able to figure out where the problems came from, if there are scratches and dents or any damaged stuff. And if it's already offloaded and nobody was there to inspect it, then the finger pointing starts. We know that happened in shipping, and the shipper's like, well, no, you took it on delivery, that didn't happen. You know, so we really want to make sure that it is inspected at every step of the way. And also, please make sure that they are stored properly. We've had cases where it's like chucked in a pile of mud and snow all winter, and then in the spring they're like, hey, this is rusty. Well, duh. So try and make sure that you're there at every step of the way. One thing we no longer do is coat the hardware. So we used to try and coat the hardware to make it match, but with powder coating, things don't adhere quite the same when you're taking a spray can out there and you're covering hardware. So now the recommendation is to just leave it in the silver, so you don't kind of get the popping and cracking around that hardware.
Melissa,
Yes.
just a quick note for everybody. If you get damage on your powder-coated rail, please call myself or Andy Fritz, or you can reach out to Melissa as well, and she can probably just transfer it to us. So,
Call them.
yeah, 'cause we get a handful of them a year.
Yep. Architectural paving. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can do stamped tooled masonry. We don't do a lot of masonry here. This is Minnesota. It snows. We plow. It's not great. I get pictures from places like Texas and Arizona all the time, and I'm like, that's a really great picture. This is Minnesota. You can't do that. So we will do some stamped occasionally. We no longer do integral color because we know that it does not hold up over time. So a lot of times we're going to use stains or color hardeners. This can actually serve a public safety. This is not always an aesthetic feature. For example, we had a project where there was a senior living community on one side and a grocery store on the other. So you had seniors going back and forth all the time. As we age, we no longer see drops very well. And they had not a very wide sidewalk in the first place. But they had a problem where people were falling off of the edge of that sidewalk onto into the travel lanes. And so adding a feature like this and creating some visual contrast can really help in a situation like that. Another thing is to keep children away from the edge. The blind can use it as a guide. There are so many reasons that something like this could be used in a specific location. So it's not always done. Precast elements, we don't do too many precast elements. The most thing that we do, the most common is a precast cap. When we're doing a texture below and we have a cap, and then we're putting a light fixture on top of that. Our lighting is almost always placed on a pilaster, and that reason is maintenance. If you don't have that lighting behind that rail, if you think of that lighting's now behind a rail, now you have to access it in a completely different way. If you have to remove a rail section, now you have other protections for that person that you have to manage. If we place it up there, it's just easier to manage from that sidewalk level and not hang over traffic and things like that. So we almost always try to put our pedestrian lighting onto a pedestal like this. And part of that is often a precast cap. We will occasionally do emblems and things like that. We are currently working on 3 different policies regarding names on bridges, words on bridges, and emblems on bridges. So that might change as we go through because communities have started to get a little crazy in that way and started trying to one-up each other and light stuff and make families in Las Vegas and city names and emblems. Roadway lighting is the only thing paid for by MnDOT. Pedestrian lighting is not. And the reason for that is this roadway pole casts enough lumens onto the walking surface to technically make it safe. These lights are not needed. They are technically an aesthetic feature based on just like lighting standards. Does it make us feel safer? Yes. But technically you can see the path and you can walk. So pedestrian poles and architectural lighting are always paid for by an outside entity. Public arts. This is difficult. So MnDOT does have a public art policy. So anything designed by an artist is public art. What's the difference between aesthetics and public art? Aesthetics is the modification of a necessary structural element. You need a railing. What does that railing look like? You have an abutment. What does that abutment look like? Art is going to be above and beyond that. That might be sculptural. We've had artists design railings. We've had artists design four liners. If an artisan is involved, it kicks into federal law. So the feds came up with a law called the VERA law, and that gives artists the right to their work. That is really bad for a state or government agency. So basically, let's say this is my house, and I hire an artist to paint this wall. The artist now owns the wall in my home. I can't remove that wall, I can't paint over it, I can't do anything. They have federal rights to that art, and by default, that wall. That same thing applies for our structures. So we have to stick to this policy because we require them to turn over their rights and that we don't engage in legal battles, because there have been battles in other states. There's a very famous project that also involves graffiti. It was called either the 5 Points or the 6 Points project out in New York. There was a developer who had an old abandoned factory with silos and all sorts of stuff. And he told graffiti artists, yeah, whatever, I'm gonna knock it all down someday and we're gonna build some condos. Go ahead and graffiti it all you want. He gave them permission. And when they went out there and painted over all the silos and started to begin knocking them all down, all the artists said, you destroyed our art. And I believe they had to pay $60 million to the graffiti artists. So, art, be cautious. We do allow it as a good partner, but it has to go through certain things. Now, from an inspection standpoint, it's harder. It's harder to incorporate, right? You're dealing with things that are structural, or not structural, sculptural in nature. How they get incorporated into a project can be difficult, but please use care with these things because in a lot of cases, they are not funded by any government entity. We had a project where the neighborhood crowdfunded to upgrade their railing on their local bridge. They went through the city with those funds, but in a lot of cases, public art has a little bit more meaning to it, or public involvement to it, or even individual funds attached to it. So even though it can be hard to incorporate, we still want to make sure that it's incorporated in. There are studies that show there's big benefits to it, from economic standpoints, from just perceptions of happiness, all of that. So it is great, but we have some legal issues with it. And then from an inspection standpoint, we really need to make sure that we're just be patient with it because it's not always easy. Here's an example. Here's a public artist that works a lot actually on transportation infrastructure. So they designed the rail and then they designed the four liner. So that was really easy for us to incorporate at a project level because it's basically just putting up anything else. Although, funny story, the day they put this railing out, somebody called and said that it was mesmerizing them when they were going to drive off the highway. That's the only complaint that I'm aware of. As-built sheets. So from aesthetics, we have the surface finish, roadway, and graffiti, and paint. please do fill these out. I use them constantly. I used at least 3 of them yesterday. I do use these all the time to see what something was painted. And especially if something has changed. We don't have as many changes because over time, aesthetics was kind of added through the design process. Now we have it all done by preliminary plans if we can. And then that means that there's less changes through final design, less changes going into construction, but I try and have it all 100% wrapped up at the signature of the preliminary plan. And that just helps all of us going through the whole process of not having so many changes. But sometimes things do change. For example, we had a bridge where we designed it, picked the color, and then the city came in and they were like, oh man, we just got funding to do 3 of our bridges and we chose this other color. So during construction, they changed the color of our structure. Well, then we come back 2 years later to build its twin, and I'm like, I don't know what color this is. So now I gotta drive to Mazeppa and do a color match so that I can put it in the specs, right? Well, that's just wasting everybody's time. So I do really use these, so please do fill them out. That is definitely used by a lot of people. So I'm going to go through some project examples. Last, just kind of tell you why we did what we did. So you can kind of appreciate some of what's out there. So this is the Highway 100 corridor. This was MnDOT's first highway, and that was a big deal. You used to take your Model T and you would drive down Highway 100 and you would pull off and you would eat your lunch and have a picnic. That was a destination to drive down the highway because you were probably pretty lucky if you had a car. So when we redid it, we took some of those traditional elements that were found in the original highway, which was called Lilac Way. So there's a lot of lilacs on this corridor. We took the same stones, the same kind of textures and things like that, and just basically gave it a facelift to current times. Valley Creek Road over 494. This was one of our first brick projects. And it has those planters on it. We really chose to upgrade it. It's probably one of the only cities that I think I've ever seen us do a planter and them actually take care of the planter. So that's impressive. This is up in Lino Lake. So you see the emblem up there. And then, so they have kind of a Reed's emblem up in their light fixtures. They have blue herons. So that all kind of goes back to that city identity where all throughout Lino Lakes, it's blue herons and those Reeds incorporated everywhere that you can. So when you get there, you're like, hey, I know I'm in Lino Lakes. And White Bear now has bears, Monticello has swans. Those things are really getting incorporated into the infrastructure. And it helps as a wayfinding feature, right? You get to White Bear and you're like, hey, go bears. So this is on the north side of the 35W bridge, so north side of the collapse bridge. A lot of people don't even realize that there is another bridge there. But this was replaced as part of the collapse. This bridge has its struggles. It had a lot of problems with graffiti. It's a great place to see a drug deal. But what FIG did when they did the design is each one of these little tiles was designed by a neighborhood child. So they brought in kids from the schools and they each designed a tile, a little mosaic, glass mosaic tile, and then that was placed on the structure. Now, that took a lot of coordination and effort in the beginning, but what is the impact long term? There is not as much graffiti on this bridge anymore because that was, some people are going out there, I did a tile on here, my sister did a tile on here, my neighbor did a tile on here, whatever. So we saw a drastic reduction in the maintenance needs on this bridge as far as graffiti is concerned. Still not a great place, so it's been, don't go down here at night. But the graffiti problem partially went away, right? So there are impacts to having public and community involvement in some of these things. It does trickle through to other areas. Margaret Street, like I talked about this, into the little community of North St. Paul. These are the colors and textures that you're going to see. When we added the highway, we brought those colors and textures out. And the snowman is right over here too. Granite City Crossing, you use granite. It would be really weird if it was called Granite City Crossing and we used limestone, right? So it uses granite. And it fits that whole community theme. So now when you go into St. Cloud, this bridge has the same textures as the bridge out on Highway 10, as the bridges on 15. It kind of creates that cohesion within a community. This is one of my absolute favorite bridges. So this bridge was originally created and dedicated to soldiers, and when we replaced it, we took all of the exact same features and just made them bigger or taller or whatever we needed to do to make them fit current safety standards, and then rededicated it back to soldiers. This is actually a tank sitting right there on the road. So even though the aesthetics look really simple, it had a lot of meaning then, and we try to keep that meaning now. And put the plaques back and those types of things. Like I said, there is an aesthetics manual coming this year, finally. This was kind of a big deal. As far as I know, it will be the only fully comprehensive aesthetics manual in the United States. I've not been able to find any other one. So we are kind of on the forefront of establishing aesthetic standards, but also trying to leave it so that you can really customize and create things for communities, which helps inspections and construction and design, but also kind of find that balance of creativity. So there will be guides in there. If you're adding brick, this is how you incorporate brick. And then as we have these lessons learned, so what if you called me and you're like, hey Melissa, every time you add brick to a project, this happens. Okay, let's fix it, and we're gonna write it down in this manual so that whoever comes after me, you know, knows all of that information. It's not just stuck in my head. So very, very excited for that. Feel free to contact me if you ever, you know, have anything you want to talk about. I learned a lot actually from people in these classes contacting me. If I don't get back to your email right away, hit me with another email again to get it to the top of my pile. I am the only one that does what I do. Like right now I have 74 bridges. So I am fairly busy. My manual will hopefully make that a lot easier in the long run, but yeah, feel free to give me a call. Does anybody have any questions? Why is there quiet? And normally I actually have magic tricks, but I kind of left them at home because my kids took them.
So you design like the landscape design plans too, or does that
No.
play out? Okay, no.
So landscape is completely separate, and a lot of times I believe landscape is even in a different contract. A lot of times that's even afterwards because they have to leave those contracts open, I think, for 2 years for plant stuff. But no, that actually comes out of our environmental stewardship office, which I'm not sure that they're called environmental stewardship anymore. I think they've had like 5 or 6 names since they started, so I might be outdated on the name, but there is a group that does all of the landscape. So like right now I'm working on Blatnick, and they do that. How some of these processes work, if you're interested, is so if it's a tiny little bridge, I'll just design it and we'll talk to the community, and then on a project like Blatnick, we'll get a whole manual. So it's really tailored to what each project needs, what we do, who's involved, and most of the lead from that is taken from cities. So like Blatnick will probably be 3 years of my life. I'm doing one in Worthington right now. 3 months is probably as much as I'll work on it because they already had an established theme. We added it to the bridge and we're done. So it's kind of all on the board for some of that stuff.
Were you involved in the public art and leasing bridge?
I was not.
It's a really good example of public art in the downtown Houston
Yes.
side. It's huge.
Huge public art. That is beautiful. So some public art is wonderful like that. We actually have quite a bit of it out there. Dale Street Bridge has a ton on there. That project was actually really interesting. So usually for a public artist to get funds, they have to have already done a ton of public art. Well, it's one of those catch-22s. How do you do art? You need to have a portfolio to do it, but you can't build a portfolio because you can't do it. So on that bridge, they actually got 5 artists and put them under one that was qualified, and then each one designed something different. So that's why Dale Street has a ton of stuff on it, because the county ran that process. So MnDOT cannot do anything with public art as far as maintenance or anything, because the way our state constitution is written, it says transportation funds must serve a transportation purpose, and case law has dictated art does not serve a transportation purpose. So art is illegal. I talk to our attorneys a lot. She's wonderful. Yeah. Also, one thing too that I'll just briefly mention is that I do also, I'm a suicide reduction contact for MnDOT. Since every bridge crosses my desk, I do handle that because I can assess whether it needs a taller railing or not. That's a big topic in today's world. So, and especially in the construction field, so if you ever feel like you need somebody to talk to, you know, you can call me, call 988, any of that stuff. But please know that there is, I know it's way off topic to aesthetics, but that's a big part of my heart. So, is suicide reduction. So you might start seeing taller railings on certain bridges, and maybe possibly some 90-day signage, things like that. That's all coming in the works too. So, yep. Awesome. Now I think you guys need a break. I don't know, they walked away, so. You're just stuck with me now. Although I'm out of here because I'm going to Hawaii. So.
What?
You guys are between me and Big Island. Not yet. I got like no finished packing.
What are they doing to the Worthington Bridge?
They have, so there's row and 59. So there's the new bridge over row, new bridge over 59. We're going to match the railroad bridge. The route that's on the bridge. And then there's some leaves on it. They don't know what they'll pick. We just emailed them the concepts last night. So they know they want to match it and what kind of configuration. Nice. So yeah, it's basically matching the existing. Yeah. They're covered. Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
From the livestock, the huge chaos.
Paul, did you see the other day?